Now, welcome to part 2 of what has become my rewrite of the Ahsoka series. A lot of you seem to enjoy the first part, so I figured let's go all in on this. And I'm really going to go all in on this, meaning that instead of just being kind of this outline, I'm going full on story mode like I have with some of my other fanfics before. Kind of wish I'd done that with the first part now and may eventually go back and kind of redo it, but for now, let's kind of press on. Let's keep the story rolling. And for the record, I'll be keeping, I guess, let's say the bones or rough idea or outline of the actual Ahsoka series intact, but changing quite a few things along the way. This will be a rather different story, but the similarities or original idea will still be kind of there. And again, this is all in good fun. This is not meant to be some sort of insult to Dave Filoni or to anyone who loved the Ahsoka series as is. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I do this because I want to get back to telling stories on this channel. It's something I'm very passionate about. And I think there's an alternate way this show could have gone that I'd like to explore. And before getting to it, if you haven't seen the first part, you almost certainly want to go and watch it so you can understand what's going on in this one. There has already been quite a few changes, and a link to the first part will be in the comments and description below. Go ahead and check it out if you like it, if you like what you see, if you enjoy it, come on back for this part and many, many more to come in the weeks to come. But for now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We begin by watching Ahsoka's T6 shuttle come out of hyperspace not far from the planet Lothal, which last time is where Sabine and Ahsoka decided to take the Night Sister orb map to see if they could further unlock it at the site of the ruined Jedi Temple, to see if Ahsoka's suspicions about it were true, and that it was far more than just a map, that it might have a way to get to the system at the end of the route or course the map charted, a system surrounded by a strange stellar anomaly, and a course that aligned with the travel patterns of the Purrgil and where they believe Ezra might have been taken by them years before, and may still yet be. As we then watch Ahsoka's ship quickly approach the planet, we're taken into the cockpit of the ship where Sabine Wren and Ahsoka Tano sit side by side, and Sabine's eyes are transfixed on the planet that grows larger and larger through the viewport in front of her. Ahsoka, noticing this, then asks, "Everything okay?" Sabine shakes her head and says, her eyes still focused on the planet, I haven't been back here since the end of the war." She frowns and shakes her head a bit. "Too many memories, I guess." The look on Ahsoka's face shifts ever so slightly, with maybe a look of, an air of disappointment on it now. "I know that look," Sabine then says with an even bigger frown on her face. "It's the very same one you gave me right before your little speech about being done training me." Ahsoka then quickly counters, "I told you from the start it would take a certain level of commitment, and that it wasn't something to either be taken lightly or done for the wrong reasons." Sabine quickly fires back, "Finding Ezra was the wrong reason?" Ahsoka seems to consider her answer briefly before responding, "No, and yet, yes." Sabine rolls her eyes and shakes her head out of frustration. "That's the reason I failed. All your Jedi sayings never make any sense. You somehow manage to always say nothing and supposedly everything at the same time." Ahsoka, her face suddenly gravely serious, then says, "Sometimes saying nothing is everything." Sabine just stares at her then, at the serene calm upon Ahsoka's face, one that says she just said the most profound thing ever, but that face soon cracks into a wide smile, one so infectious that Sabine can't help but smile as well. Sabine then says, "Seriously, you Jedi need to work on your sayings. I remember this one time before a mission, Kanan told me that I needed to trust my instincts, but don't rely on them too much. What is that even supposed to mean?" "Honestly," Ahsoka begins, "I don't have the slightest idea. I've never heard that one before." The two then share a quick laugh before the cockpit falls silent, almost uncomfortably silent. It's then that Sabine punches at the controls on the panel before her and says with a look that tries to imply she's not even all that interested in the answer, "So, why did you agree to start to train me in the first place if I don't have the ability to do what you can do, if I don't have the Force?" Ahsoka takes a moment to consider how to answer before saying, "All of us have the Force within us, because all of us are a part of it. But every so often one can truly learn to connect with it, to wield it. But if you don't start training at a young age, it can be difficult to unlock later in life." "Could have told me that before," Sabine grumbles as she continues to punch at the controls and then says, "Well, are you sure it was even there in the first place with me?" That's when Huyang enters the cockpit and says, "No, she is not." They both turn to face him, and Ahsoka is about to say something to scold him, but Huyang quickly adds, "But Kanan once believed the potential was within you somewhere, though considering how many years ago that was, and you had no success then, I'd say the chances of it happening now are not good." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Sabine says back. Hu Yang then responds, "Would you have preferred a lie simply to keep your hopes alive, only to be crushed later?" Ahsoka gives another look at Hu Yang before looking back at Sabine and saying, "What I think he's trying to say is, and what I think Kanan was trying to tell you once was, is that you may or may not have the ability to use the Force somewhere down deep, Sabine, but what you certainly have is natural talent. Talent that I thought I could help you hone should you ever have to face down one who does wield the Force. That's why I started to train you." "Then why stop training me if that's all it was?" Sabine fires back. We then hear a voice come over the comms and it says, "Jedi Shuttle, this is Lothal Central Command. Permission granted to land in Sector 44A3. There's then a brief pause before the voice finishes, "And welcome home, Commander Wren." Those words seem to flood Sabine with emotions, but after taking a second to steady herself, she simply hits a button and says, "Thank you, Central Command." Next, we're watching as the Jedi Shuttle lands in what can only be described as a completely wide-open, flat, barren plain, where virtually nothing, no features of any kind, can be seen no matter which direction you look in. After the shuttle lands, we then watch the ramp lower, and there the three, Sabine, Ahsoka, and Hu Yang, walk down it, and towards a strange circular symbol on the ground. It's Ahsoka who, after closing her eyes and concentrating for a few moments, who opens them and says, "Thankfully, I still feel a very strong vergence in the Force here, but I don't think it'll be possible to raise the temple again." Hu Yang then quickly says, "Not that it matters anyway. This temple required 2 Jedi to open, generally a master ready to test an apprentice's readiness." Sabine, as if trying to ignore him, then quickly says, "Just be happy you weren't here when it was collapsing. We barely made it out of this place alive." Sabine then thinks a moment and says, "Well, I guess you were kinda here for that, weren't you?" Ahsoka gives Sabine a rather questioning look, and Sabine goes on, "Ezra didn't tell us much about what happened in there, what he saw and what he did after I watched him jump through a stone wall, which was crazy enough." Her eyes then focus on Ahsoka, and she continues, "But he did say he found you in there, that he saw you through a portal and pulled you in just in time to save your life?" Ahsoka's face becomes rather distant, as if remembering and reflecting on all that. She then looks down at the ground, at the symbol at her feet, and says, "Somehow, that all almost feels like a dream now. A day I sometimes have a hard time reminding myself was real." Sabine then takes a step towards Ahsoka and then asks, "No more Jedi riddles. What exactly happened in there? You've always refused to talk about it at all. And Ezra, he wasn't much different. And after that, after what happened in there, and not just because we lost Kanan, it was like he was different. He knew he was going to be leaving us soon. Like he knew what was going to happen to him eventually." Ahsoka lets out a little sigh before saying, "He did save my life in there." She then glances down at where the temple is buried and continues, "Well, not in there, because where we were is a place that isn't really anywhere." Sabine shakes her head and responds, "I said no more riddles." Ahsoka gives a faint smile before saying, "Ezra did know something was going to happen to him, and somehow I felt it when I was in there with him. Before we went our separate ways, he asked me to come and find him, and I promised him I would. Like I understood, and yet I still don't understand. But it was like we somehow knew he was going to end up lost after all this, that by saving me, he would one day maybe save himself." Sabine's eyes narrow on her. "You promised Ezra you'd find him?" Ahsoka then gives a single nod of the head, and Sabine continues, "Why? Why didn't you ever tell me that?" Ahsoka gives a shrug of the shoulders and simply says back, "It would have changed nothing." Sabine, a bit of anger in her eyes now, then says back, "It changes everything. It means you should have never given up looking for him. Left me to do it all by myself, chasing Purgil from this corner of the galaxy to that one." Ahsoka tries to give Sabine a gentle look to calm her and says, "I didn't give up looking for him, Sabine." That seems to anger Sabine even more, and she responds, "So what, you only gave up looking for him with me?" Ahsoka shakes her head, trying to tell her she's getting it all wrong, and says, "I only mean that we must be cautious here." Sabine interrupts, "Cautious? You just said that you made a promise to him, that he saved your life, and you're not doing everything you can to return that favor?" Ahsoka then says, "Look, Sabine, there is nothing I would like more than to, yes, return the favor and find Ezra, to bring him home to his family." After Ahsoka leaves that hanging, Sabine chimes in, But I can't think only about what I want, or assume I know what a feeling I had a very long time ago even means. We must be cautious here, and not forget why Ezra did what he did in the first place." Sabine's eyes narrow again, and it's a different target, one in her own mind now, that is the focus of all her anger, as she quietly says, "Thrawn." Ahsoka nods her head and responds, Finding Ezra risks finding him too, and Thrawn's return could galvanize the Imperial remnant, lead to a new war. One we could win again, Sabine quickly chimes in. Ahsoka, surprised to hear her say that, responds, yes, but at what cost, Sabine? Would you see millions die to bring Ezra home? There is the briefest hesitation before Sabine scoffs at the idea and says, of course not. But isn't he owed something, if not everything? Didn't you just say you're alive because of him? Aren't we all alive because of him? Wouldn't we have lost the Battle of Lothal? Maybe the war, if not for his sacrifice? Every person on this world owes him something. And that is why I ended your training, Ahsoka begins with the same disappointed look on her face from before. She then continues, Ezra didn't do what he did to be owed anything. He did it because he was the only one that could, because it was what he had to do as a Jedi. And that's what being a Jedi is, Sabine. It's sacrifice, not just doing for the ones you care about. Even when you make them a promise, Sabine fires back in response before just turning and heading back towards the ship, and turning even before she could see those words truly did cut into Ahsoka. Huyang then says, I tried to tell you right when you took her on that Mandalorians cannot be Jedi. They're too loyal. Ahsoka turns her head and looks at him and responds, and that's a flaw? It clearly can be, Huyang then says, turning his own head to watch Sabine storm up the ship's ramp. Ahsoka then says, maybe if the Jedi had a bit more of this flaw, they wouldn't be in the condition they are now. Meaning? Huyang asks. But Ahsoka doesn't answer. Instead, she pulls the Night Sister map orb out from her gray robe and says, the virgins here should hopefully help me push back the Night Sister's defenses. Huyang then says, but might the virgins not also strengthen those defenses? Ahsoka slowly turns her head and frowns at him. And you're only pointing this out now? Huyang only says back, I figured you'd realize that, but we're willing to take the risk. Ahsoka frowns at him and then moves to stand in the center of the symbol on the ground, holding the orb in both hands, and then she shuts her eyes. When she opens them again a moment later, she seemingly finds herself in a temple made of gray stone, perhaps the same one she found the map in originally. However, now it is in pristine condition instead of ruined. Before her is a long, narrow, high-ceiling corridor lined with, on both sides, pillars and statues of robed female figures with their hands clasped together. At the end of this corridor, in the center of a circular chamber, is a large green flame, and after looking around a bit, quickly examining some of the strange symbols that she notices are carved upon everything, upon the floor, ceiling, walls, and pillars, she slowly starts to walk down the corridor, approaching the green flame, soon noticing next to it stands a hunched-over figure clad in red, hood pulled up over the face, holding a long, slender white staff with a small loop at the end. That's when Ahsoka hears what can only be described as a small screech and looks up to see, perched atop one of these statues, is a colorful bird-like creature, a convor that flaps its wings at her, almost as if a greeting of some type. We then see Ahsoka smile and say, glad I won't be alone in here. It's then that what we can only assume is the red-clad figure by the flame, who is still some 100 paces away from Ahsoka or down the corridor, she says in an echoey voice, you are hardly alone in here. Which is when Ahsoka freezes in place, and both sides of her, along the corridor, green spirits materialize out of the walls, dozens upon dozens of them, but they do not approach, they simply stand or float and watch her as she continues to walk. The voice then speaks again, come, closer come, and look into the fire. Ahsoka, with her eyes going from side to side, watching the motionless green spirits, keeps walking down the corridor and towards both the hunched-over figure and the green flame she stands by. When but 10 paces away from it, the figure again says, look into the fire. Ahsoka, coming to a halt, responds, and what will I see? Why, what you seek, of course. Ahsoka smirks and slightly shakes her head. And you're going to help me, just like that. The red-clad figure then bangs the butt of her staff against the floor, causing the green flame to flare and jump to life. And for what seems to be strange images to start to take shape within the flames, images that even seem to take the shape of faces. The red-clad witch then raises her other hand, and as the sleeve rolls down the arm, we can see that the hand is little more than wrinkled, grayish-white skin pulled taut over bone, and she pulls back her hood, revealing an almost skeletal face with green eyes and long, pure white hair. She then speaks, long have I been trapped within here. A fool my sister was to choose that which none should even know exists. Long now have I waited the call of my sister once more, the call to guide her home. Ahsoka takes a couple steps towards the red-clad figure and inquires, "Where did your sister go?" That's when Ahsoka realizes that not only have the green spirits moved while she momentarily stopped paying attention to them, but now completely surround her and are ever so slowly closing in all around her. The red-clad witch, the Night Sister, then says, "Look into the flame. Find the answers you seek." Ahsoka shakes her head, but then one of the strange face-like images in the fire becomes all too clear to her. It becomes the face of Ezra Bridger, and cries out for help. We hear him call out her name, "Ahsoka!" Then the green flame flares up again. The image of Ezra and all the others are gone, and quietly yet earnestly saying his name, saying Ezra, and even reaching out to it with her hand, Ahsoka takes a couple of quick steps towards the flame and stares into it. Which is when we're once again taken outside this place, back to the temple location on Lothal, and at first we see Ahsoka simply standing there, eyes closed with the ball held in both her hands, while Huyang stands nearby, somehow with a nervous type expression on his droid face. That's when there's this sort of green flash from the orb, and immediately after it happens, Ahsoka's body goes completely limp, and the orb slips from her hand as she crashes to the ground into a heap. Huyang cries out for Sabine to come and help, but before the words are even uttered, Sabine is already running down the ramp and towards them, clearly having been watching from just inside the ship the whole time in case anything may go wrong. "What happened?" Sabine asks when she reaches them, standing over Ahsoka and looking hesitant to even reach down and touch her, not knowing if that's even the right thing to do. And it's then that we're taken elsewhere in the galaxy, to the spacious golden bridge of a large, luxurious-looking ship, where we see Morgan Elsbeth looking out a large viewport, when suddenly she flinches as if experiencing some sort of physical pain, even dropping down to a knee. Baylan, who is on the bridge with her, along with Shin, he takes a step forward and helps her back to her feet. "What is it?" he asks. Morgan replies, "She knows. She knows what the orb is, and now it calls to me. She calls to me." Baylan glances behind him at Shin, and her face contorts into a look of doubt and disdain before Baylan says to Morgan, "Calls to you from where?" Morgan shuts her eyes, and we can again see this sort of pained and strained expression there as she tries to reach out to it. She almost falls to a knee yet again, but Baylan holds her up. After several long seconds of struggling, Morgan says, "Somewhere strong with the Force, a place of endless tall grass." Once again, Baylan looks to Shin, and her look seems even more filled with disdain now. She even slowly shakes her head this time. A few more seconds go by, and finally Morgan's eyes open, and she says, "Lothal. The world is Lothal." Baylan's brow furrows when he hears that name. He even says or asks, "The Jedi Temple on Lothal." Shin steps forward and says, "You know this place, Master." Baylan nods. "I do. A place my master once took me as a test, and one I shall now take you as well, it seems. Perhaps for a test of your own, Shin." She then quickly says, "I am ready, Master, ready to destroy this Ahsoka." Baylan smiles almost kindly, but says nothing to that. Instead, he says to Morgan, "Lothal is an outer rim world, not far from where we are now. Perhaps if we make haste." That's when Morgan, who seems rather taxed by her experience, says before moving to take a seat, "Then go now, destroy Ahsoka, and bring me the orb." Baylan gives a slight bow and says, "It shall be done." Baylan and Shin exit the bridge, and a moment later we see them swiftly walking together down a corridor in the ship, and Shin says, "Why do you take orders from her, Master? Her witchcraft is no match for the power we possess." Baylan nods slightly in agreement. "Perhaps not, but that witch has paid us quite well for our services, and more importantly she offers us a means by which to reach a place we otherwise could not, to seek a power beyond hers or ours or anything else we could possibly imagine. And we shall honor our agreement to her in order to achieve our own ends, and because it is honor that separates us from these witches, which makes us the rightful ones to possess this power, not them." Shin reluctantly seems to accept this answer, and we then shift back to Lothal, where Huyang and Sabine still stand over Ahsoka, and we hear Sabine say, "We can't just leave her like this." Huyang responds, "If we move her away from the Virgins and the Force, it may sever whatever connection she's formed with the orb." Sabine quickly says back, "Isn't that a good thing?" Huyang gives her a look and responds, "Not if her spirit remains trapped in the orb." Sabine's eyes go wide. "Wait, you think her spirit is in the orb? Is that even possible?" Huyang then says, "You may not like Jedi sayings, but one I've heard them say for over 20,000 years now is that all things are possible through the Force. Sabine makes a face and looks down at Ahsoka and says, "So we just, what, leave her like this and hope her spirit makes its way back to her body and she wakes up?" Huyang says, "I'm afraid that might be our only option at this point. We must trust in Ahsoka. We must trust in the Force." Again, Sabine frowns. "Shouldn't we at least call for help or something? And ask them to do what exactly?" Huyang responds. "Remove someone's spirit from an orb and place it back in their own body?" Sabine thinks for a moment. What about another Jedi?" Huyang seems to consider that and says, "I'm not so sure another Jedi would be able to help in this situation." Sabine snaps back, "But it's worth a try, isn't it?" Huyang says, "I suppose it couldn't hurt." The scene then shifts to nighttime, and we see that they've built a roaring fire not far from Ahsoka, and that Sabine sits nearby with a data pad of some kind in her hand, one that she's swiping her fingers across on the screen as if working on something. Huyang then comes down the ramp of the ship and towards her carrying a cup of some sort of steaming liquid that he, when he reaches her, hands to Sabine, which causes her to put the data pad aside, and for Huyang to glance at it and ask, "What is that you're working on?" Sabine takes a sip of the drink, then sets it aside and picks the data pad back up and shows the screen to him. "A few years ago, I was asked if I wanted to make some type of monument to him, to all of us, I guess, for what we had done for Lothal. But ever since we lost Kanan and then Ezra, I just haven't felt as inspired as I used to, you know?" We then see the image on the screen of the data pad, and it is a design of some type of mural of the entire Phoenix crew. Sabine seems to be about to say more when she sees an ever-growing light on the horizon and says, "Is that a ship? Did someone answer your call for help? Is that another Jedi?" Huyang then says, "Unlikely, considering I never made such a call." Sabine gives him a look like she wants to yell at him, but then immediately realizes that if it's not a friend that approaches, it could be a foe. Sabine gets to her feet and draws her blaster pistols as the ship, which is a small shuttle of some kind, soars overhead and then swings back around and lands right next to the Jedi shuttle. Moments later, the ramp of the ship is lowering and down it strides Baylan and Shin. With pistols pointed at them, Sabine demands to know who they are and what they're doing here, but the only answer she gets is Baylan raising his hand and making a casual swiping motion with it that sends Sabine flying a good 20 paces from a force bush. The two, Baylan and Shin, continue to walk towards the fire, towards Ahsoka, when Huyang moves in front of the pair and demands to know the meaning of this, which is when Baylan grabs his saber from his belt and ignites it, as if he's about to swing it without a second thought, cutting Huyang in two. But he stops himself, and his face wrinkles in confusion, and his eyes widen just a bit as he stares at Huyang, which is when we see Huyang look at the saber hilt in the hand of Baylan and say, "Fascinating." Like with Sabine then, Baylan simply raises a hand and force pushes the droid away, and the pair move to and come to a stop above Ahsoka. They scan the ground for a second and spot the orb. Baylan reaches down and picks it up, all the while Shin's intense eyes are locked on the unconscious Ahsoka. Baylan lays a hand on Shin's shoulder and says, "Not like this. There is no honor in such an action." We then hear the sound of firing blaster bolts, and Baylan, his saber still ignited, he blocks the shots that Sabine is taking at them after getting back up from the force push. "Get away from them," Sabine shouts. Baylan looks at Sabine, then at Shin and says, "The challenge you seek, perhaps, my apprentice." Shin shakes her head and says, "She is no challenge." And all Baylan says in response is, "Prove it." Those words seem to light a fire in Shin, and she takes her saber, ignites it, and charges at Sabine, who fires a few more shots with her pistols that get blocked with ease by Shin. Right before Shin reaches her, she drops them, the pistols, and takes hold of Ezra's lightsaber from her belt, ignites the green blade, and blocks the orange blade of Shin right before it slices into her. Shin gives a large grin, and her eyes widen with excitement, and she mutters the word Jedi as if happy it wasn't going to be that easy after all. Sabine then takes a step back and attacks, but is easily blocked by Shin, and after a few very unsuccessful strikes, Shin is back on the offensive. And it's taking everything Sabine has to block her angrier and angrier yet precise strikes. And the longer this goes on, the angrier Shin seems to become, not because it's difficult or a challenge, but rather seemingly because it isn't. Shin then disarms Sabine, sending her lightsaber flying, and then force pushes her, knocking her, Sabine, off her feet and onto her back. Sabine quickly scrambles up to her knees at least, and then, almost instinctually, with this sort of desperate concentration on her face, she reaches out her hand towards Ezra's saber some 20 feet away, as if trying to pull it to her, as if trying to use the force to pull it to her, but nothing happens. And as soon as Shin realizes nothing is going to happen, a mocking smile forms on her face and says, "You are no Jedi. You have no power." Sabine ignores her, and the look on her face intensifies as she keeps her hand outstretched, trying with everything she has to pull the saber, which is when Shin, all in one fluid motion, reaches out her own free hand, pulls Ezra's saber to her, ignites it, and swings, severing Sabine's hand off at the wrist. As Sabine cries out in pain, a twisted smile forms on Shin's face as she raises the green saber of Ezra like she's going to strike her down. But we then hear the voice of Baylan, who is standing by the ramp of their ship, and he calls out, "Shin, there is no honor in this either." Shin seems tempted to defy her master and finish off Sabine anyway, but then deactivates both sabers and holds up Ezra's to her and says, "You don't deserve this weapon, pretender," before making a swiping motion with her hand, which sends Sabine hurtling through the air yet again, and then Shin simply turns and heads back towards Baylan, back towards the ship, and that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of this part of the story. Was it good? Was it bad? Should I continue? Should I stop? Whatever the case may be, you know what to do. Leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.